Welcome to the Upside, the show here in Long Meadow. We talk about all the good things going on in our town and the surrounding communities. Today, we're going to expand that surrounding communities with courtesy of Zoom here. We're doing our second interview on Zoom, and so it's new, but for me, but it also gives us some flexibility. And today, I'm very honored to have as our guest Bradley Blakeman, and Brad is. I'll give you some background on him, but Brad's coming to us from Washington, D.C., I believe, and Brad is the principal in the 1600 group down in Washington, but also was in the George W. Bush White House during the September 11th attacks, and we got to meet at the September 11th monument dedication here in Springfield. Brad, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure.
Brad, I want to just talk to you about, we had a great conversation when you came up here to Springfield back in the summer when he dedicated the 9/11 memorial. And I thought, and at that time I said to you, I got to get you on my TV show because the stories were just so compelling. And I want to start out that on the day of the attacks, September 11th, it was a beautiful Tuesday morning for most of the country. It was, bright blue skies and everything. What did your day start out as how was it when you went to work that day?
Right. Well, I was a member of President George W. Bush's senior staff. There were about 16 of us. I was in charge of the president's time. I was the gatekeeper. I was the deputy assistant to the president for appointments and scheduling and vetting and research, correspondence and surrogate scheduling. So every minute of the time the president had came through my office. So that day, as we all know, the president was down in Florida doing an event on education at an elementary school. And when the first attacks happened, my day started out the same as most senior staff. I got to the office around 6 a.m. The president was already in Florida. We had our first senior staff meeting at 7 a.m., which was typical. Some of the senior staff were with the president, and those who hung back in Washington, we had Josh Bolton, who was the deputy chief of staff, run that meeting. Typical meeting lasted about half hour. Generally, we go over the president's schedule, what needs to be done that day, what do we need to know, and then we adjourn back to our offices to start our day. Typical.
Okay.
I returned to my office. I always had the television set on in my office. The reason being is I knew that events as they happen would affect the president's schedule, so I always had the TV news going so that I could respond to whatever was on the news. And certainly this day, nothing affected the president's schedule more. When I heard the first report of a small airplane had hit the first tower of the Trade Center, I found it odd because it was a beautiful day. And I couldn't understand how a small private aircraft, that was what was reported, could have hit the tower on such a clear day. And so I thought that was very strange. I am from New York. My brother was the commissioner, one of the commissioners on the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which owned the Trade Center. And I continued to watch the television coverage. And then as many Americans saw in real time, I saw the second plane hit. And I said to myself at that time, America is under attack. This is an intentional act of terrorism. And I told my deputy, Kara Fig, to come in my office. I told her what was going down. And then I left my office and went to the Situation Room, which is down the hall in the West Wing, to see what, if anything, they knew. Of course, they didn't know very much because they were watching it in real time as well. Then there came a time when the senior staff was gathered in what's known as the White House Mess. It's the dining facility in the West Wing. We were given a briefing that we would be evacuating the West Wing and to follow our instructions. And we evacuated the West Wing in a hurry. The Secret Service had all their hardware out, all their weapons, and we had to leave the 18 acres of the White House. I was responsible for about 150 people on an off-site location, and we had to figure out what was happening, what the president was going to be doing. And then what I did with my 150 people was I broke them out into groups. And I wanted one group to analyze what did the president's schedule look like after the attack on Pearl Harbor. When did he address the nation? Where did he address the nation? What are the things he did first? I also had a team on the Murrow bombing in Oklahoma. What happened there? What did the president do? When did he do it? So these various teams look back in history so that when the president returned to Washington, I could give him a 2-page briefing sheet of what other presidents did at time of crisis, so he could wrap his head around what other presidents had done and what he should consider doing. When do you go to the scene? When do you address Congress? When do you address the nation? It was decided in the afternoon that the president would come back to the White House and address the nation from the Oval Office. That had to be prepared. We had picnic tables all over the south lawn of the White House for the congressional picnic that never happened. Those had to be removed so Marine One could land on the south lawn. The president and some senior staff were in the bunker, which was top secret until this incident, the east wing of the White House.
Yep.
And so what we did is we continued to work. We prepared the briefing for the president. When it was decided that the president would return to the White House, about 4 of us were told to return to the White House. I released the rest of my staff in the afternoon while it was still light so that they could get home. And during this whole time, my sister was calling me because my nephew was a court officer in Lower Manhattan, just blocks from the World Trade Center, and nobody had heard from him. It turns out he died saving people in the South Tower. He was told to leave, he wouldn't leave, and the tower collapsed. We didn't know that till many days later. And then my brother was calling me because my nephew was not responding, and also he was a commissioner of the Port Authority, which owned the Trade Center. When I returned to the White House, the president, we were awaiting his arrival and his address to the nation. That night I left about midnight, and my home, I had to cross the bridge over to Virginia. I lived in Arlington, and I could see that the Pentagon was still on fire. I returned to my office the next day at about 5:30 a.m. The rest of the staff was coming in by 6. I knew the president's schedule that we had scheduled was no longer reliable. I had the president fully scheduled for 21 days at all times. I knew exactly what the president was doing for 21 days. That was out the window. It took us about 45 days to get back to 21 days after 9/11. Wow. And the whole schedule had changed. The things that we wanted to do domestically or internationally, we were now a wartime schedule and footing. So the whole dynamic of the White House had changed, and we were scheduling the president literally minute by minute. I told Secretary Card, our chief of staff, on the 12th that, my nephew was missing. And he asked me if I had told the president. I said I did not. The president had too much going on, and we were hoping for his return. And 2 minutes later, the president called me at my desk. And he said, "We're going to pray for your nephew's return." And probably the first time he's ever said it, he said, "We're going to find the people who did this and bring them to justice." And 2 minutes later, the president was at my desk. And he said, "My family, we're going to pray for Tommy and his safe return, but we're going to find the people who did this and bring them to justice." And I can tell you, as somebody, I was the only staff person who lost a family member. I had a critical eye as to what was going on, what intentions were, and I can tell you, I was never more proud of a president and the staff and the country and the government, because it acted with the best intentions, and they were doing things for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And so, as it turned out, my nephew was never recovered. His badge and his gun were the only thing that were found. And the president asked me, when do I go to ground zero? And I said, "Sir, you've got to go like immediately, but you can't go the way we normally go, with the kind of footprint, shutting down what is a recovery site still. You can't travel with the kind of staff that you normally travel with. The Secret Service can't do the things that they normally do. And it's not for us to tell the Secret Service what to do or what not to do. It's only things that we can suggest. But the president pretty much had to tell them that they couldn't do what they normally would do. and he had to take great risk in order to go to ground zero. We didn't know whether this was a continuing threat to the country, but the president went because he had to go. And we went
Yeah.
with a small footprint. It was known as an OTR, an off-the-record movement. It was not widely known when he'd go and where he'd go, but the president had to go. And he went. The rest is history. It was not scripted. What you saw is what you got from the heart. And then the president spent a long time consoling families at the Javits Center. And that was basically the week of 9/11. What was supposed to be a typical week at the White House was everything but. And what was supposed to be the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the president when he came into office were gone. And we had to pivot, and he had to pivot, and we had to secure the country, and he had to be a wartime president.
So you mentioned something about how you had two different groups of people looking at what happened at Pearl Harbor, with the president and so forth. Do you prepare for something like that with your role, or is that just like a gut thing that said, hey, we got to take care of this?
No, I decided that, we had to keep people working. What was the mission now? And the mission, I thought, was to give the president a historical perspective of what did other presidents do. It's as important what they do as what they say. Where they do it, very important. And when it was decided that the president would address the nation from the Oval Office, it was done because that is the seat of power for the United States. And that office is a symbol. When the president went to address the nation, like FDR did, he did it before a joint session of Congress. We did the same thing. We called in Tony Blair as our guest for that address, and Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki. And we filled the gallery with the heroes of 9/11. And this was still an ongoing effort by the time the president addressed Congress. My gut told me that now the job is to provide the president with historical perspective. What did other presidents do at time of crisis? What did they do? When did they do it? How did they do it? And why did they choose to do it at that time? So it's important for the president to have that sense of history when he's making history.
Yeah. So as the guy who controls the schedule for 21 days in advance, you are technically the most important person or most powerful person in the White House. So how cool of a job was that you had that? I mean, you've done a lot of things in your life, but I mean, how cool was that going to work every day there?
It was awesome. And the president told me when he first asked me to take the job, he said, let me tell you something. I'm always going to be on time. Well, I knew that because I worked in the campaign. You could set your watch by George W. Bush. He said, I don't care if I'm meeting a citizen, a king, a president, I'm always on time. So that's a blessing for somebody who controls time.
Yep. And
the president was very respectful of other people's time. And he had a vision of how he wanted to lead this country. And, we had a saying in the White House, it was Andy Card's favorite saying, if you want to see the president, you will never see the president. But if you need to see the president, you always will.
Okay.
Now, a lot of the times, the answer was no, because there's only a finite schedule that we can have for the president. But you have to prioritize. And the president also told me something very important. He said, who do you think is the most important person in your life when you come to work for me? He said, do you know? And I said, I think I have a good idea. He goes, no, you don't. It's Mrs. Bush. He said, because if I go home and she's not happy because I missed a birthday, then I'm not going to be happy with you. So he's right. He had to juggle being the president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, being a husband and being a father and his family. So we had a symbiotic relationship with Mrs. Bush and her staff to make sure that there was harmony in the White House and there was harmony at home.
So even at Pennsylvania Avenue, happy wife, happy life still prevails.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome. Hey, there was a story you told me, and I want to get back to like current politics and so forth. There was a story you told me about when you were a kid, there was a president who came to the airport and you wanted to go meet You told your mother you were going to go meet the president of the United States. Right. Tell everyone what happened on that day and what became of that.
Well, we were in the midst of
I
Watergate.
think it's the coolest story, by the way, that it has a 360-degree turn on here. Yeah.
Right. When I was in high school in Palm Springs, California, Richard Nixon, in the height of Watergate, was coming to Palm Springs, California. So I told my mother, I said, I would like to meet the president. And that's all I said. And the next thing I know, she fires off a telegram to the White House saying, my son wants to meet the president. Well, hold on a second. So people think I'm making this stuff up. My mother fires off this telegram, and we get back a letter.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome.
From the White House.
Yeah.
1974, from Bill Timmons, assistant to the president.
Oh, neat.
And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I got a letter from the president. Of course, it said he can't meet me, but that's not the point. The point is, I got a letter from the White House. So the next year, we have a new president, Gerald Ford. I find out he's coming to Palm Springs for Easter. And I told my mother, I don't need to meet him, but I'd like to see Air Force One. Could I ditch school and walk down to the airport and see Air Force One? So she said, sure. So I took my camera, walked half a mile to the Palm Springs airport, and I see VIPs on the inside of the fence, and I'm standing on the outside of the fence. And I got my camera. I'm ready to watch Air Force One, and the president arrived. And a Secret Service agent comes up to me and tells me to leave. So I said, but I'm here to see the president. He said, you can't stand here. You got to leave. I said, well, how about the people on the inside of the fence? Those are VIPs. That's the governor. That's the mayor. No, you can't be here. Leave. So I went home, walked 3 miles home. Our home overlooked the city. I turned the TV on, opened the patio doors, and I saw Air Force One this big. Okay. I heard the arrival on the news. And then when all the hoopla was over, the president left. My mom took me out to the airport. And I didn't even know you were going to ask me this, but I got it right here. I took pictures of Air Force One out on the tarmac.
Awesome.
And I told my mother, someday I'm going to be inside that fence and I'm going to be on that plane.
There you go.
Now, what my mother didn't know is later on that night, I walked back to the airport and I got my picture taken in front of Air Force One.
So there's some violations of security, I believe, there, right? So,
well, not at that time.
No.
But in any event, fast forward now I'm out of college. I volunteer with Ronald Reagan's campaign, 1980. George Bush becomes our nominee for vice president. I go from Reagan to Bush, helping them, traveling all over the country. Now we win, and now I'm working with Vice President Bush. Vice President Bush then runs for president. I help him. He wins, and I get invited on Air Force One by the president, and I have a picture of me on Air Force One, the same plane I saw when I was 17.
That's awesome.
The first thing I did was I called my mother. And when you fly in Air Force One, there's a phone next to you. The operator's at the front of the plane. You pick up the phone. They go, Mr. Blakeman, how can I help you? I said, I'd like to call my mother. Here's her number. And the Air Force One operator calls and says, Mrs. Blakeman, I have Mr. Blakeman aboard Air Force One. Go ahead, please. And I told my mother, I said, remember when I told you I would be on the plane? I am on the plane with the President of the United States. But in all the trips that I did prior to me flying on Air Force One, I never forgot the people on the other side of the fence. I always made sure that they were invited in because I remembered what it was like being on the other side of the fence and being dismissed and told to go home. So now I'm in charge of President George H.W. Bush's trip to Miami. And people think the Secret Service run the show. It's actually the staff that runs the show. So I was running what's known as a countdown meeting prior to the president's arrival. And at the first countdown meeting, about 5 days before the president arrives, I would go around the room and ask people to stand up and tell me what their role in the visit was. So one guy would stand up, I'm in charge of Air Force One Advance, I'm in charge of the helicopters, and this guy stands up and says, I'm the lead agent for the Miami field office, and I'm in charge of the Miami field office for the Secret Service. So I say to myself, I know this guy. I've seen this guy. it's the guy who kicked me out when I was 17. And I had his picture. And I traveled with his picture and the pictures that I showed you as a reminder to me
Oh, wow.
where I came from.
Yep.
I stopped the meeting and I said, hey, were you on President Ford's detail in 1975 when he came to Palm Springs, California? And he had to think a minute. He says, yes, I was. I said, well, I can tell you what you were doing at the arrival. You were working the airport. He goes, how do you know? I said, because you kicked me out. I got your picture. But after the meeting, we laughed. I showed him the picture, showed him the pictures, and we laughed. And a day before the president's arrival in Miami, he called me. He said, can you do me a favor? I said, what do you need? He goes, my parents live in Boca. Would it be all right if I brought them out to the airport to see the arrival? And I'm saying, what comes around goes around.
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm sorry, it's not possible. And I could hear like a gasp. I said, no, absolutely, we want them to come out. So on the day of arrival, I see him walk his parents to the press area, and I called Air Force One. And I said, we're going to add 3 greeters to the greeter line. They said, who is it? I said, it's the agent in charge of the Miami field office for the Secret Service and his parents. They said, fine. Gave him the names. I walked his parents out to where the governor and the mayor were, and he comes running over. And he says, what are you doing? I said, the president wants to meet you and your parents. He goes, oh, no, this is not, we can't do this. It's not right. I said, no, it's done. So when the president arrived, I introduced him to the Secret Service agent. They took pictures with his parents, and he came over. He goes, that's so nice of you to do that. I said, but that's what we do. You know? So
Yeah.
What comes around goes around, but the story gets better. Now I'm working for the son, Governor Bush. He's running for president. We're in New Hampshire. I'm in charge of New Hampshire. There's a snowstorm. We can't campaign. We're locked in the hotel, social distancing. And so Governor Bush turns to me. He says, I never asked you how you got involved in politics and helping my dad and my mom. So I'm telling him the story. I'm telling you.
Yep.
And all he says, he looks at me and goes, that's really cool. So now I'm in the White House working for George W. Bush. And I'm on a committee to find a new home for the retiring Air Force One, tail 27,000, which is the plane I saw on the tarmac with President Ford and that I rode on with President Bush the father.
Yeah.
Now we had to give recommendations as to where does this plane go. Boeing wanted it, the Air Force wanted it, the Smithsonian wanted it, and the Reagan Library wanted it. Turns out the Reagan Library had the best proposal because it would mean the most people can see the aircraft and experience it.
Yep.
The President Bush decided that he would go with the Reagan Library. That's where the plane is today. But they wanted him to take the last flight from Andrews Air Force Base in Washington to Orange County, California, and turn the plane over to Mrs. Reagan. Well, it turns out there was a scheduling conflict. The president couldn't do it. So on high-profile events, I would go into the president and say, sir, you can't do this. Is there somebody you want to represent you? So when I proposed that to the president, he goes, I have somebody. I said, who? He goes, you. I go, me? He goes, yeah, you told me that story. You have a lot of history.
Oh, wow.
He says, I want you to represent me. I took the last flight on that plane.
Oh, awesome. Great job.
I spoke. I turned the plane over to Mrs. Reagan on behalf of the president. And I even have a picture of me taking the last flight of Air Force One.
I love it.
From
That's awesome.
Air Force Base to the Reagan Library. There's a book about it called Air Force One. It's for sale on the Reagan Library gift shop website. But it was a lasting reminder to me to never forget where you came from.
Yeah.
Never forget the people on the outside of the fence. Incorporate them if you can. And our whole role in government is to be responsive to the people who get you there.
Yeah. What an awesome story to have that connection, have the connection with your mom. What a great mom to let you skip school.
Yeah.
Right? To go see the president's airplane.
Oh, yeah.
And then to have it go all the way back and you're the guy delivering it to the, what's even more amazing is that with all the stuff that's coming down on the president, he still remembered that story that you told him.
Yeah.
It's about people. And he seemed like that to me, that kind of guy. He's a people guy. So let me ask you, I love that story. We didn't even go that far. You just told me about the Secret Service agent. I did the connection of that airplane in your life is just absolutely phenomenal. And I love it. So you've been around Washington, obviously, for a little while. You've obviously, in the Bush White House, George W. Bush White House, you saw the nastiness that can come from hanging chads and things like that, right? What do you think about politics today, where it's almost like, to me, it's almost like WWE stuff. You know, it's smack in your face, and I'm talking all sides. It's not, and I'm not pointing a finger at anybody, but it just seems like it's WWE SmackDown 24 hours a day. There's that, you get that one little moment of let's work together, and then the other 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 365 days a year is just, it's terrible in a way. And I sense that with people, that they don't like that, what's going, it's okay to disagree, but it's that discourse that's there. What do you think about that?
Well, years ago, it was rough and tumble. It got mean, but it never seemed to break the law. Nixon was an anomaly, obviously, but we're in that territory where people now are willing to break the law, skirt the law, in order to gain political points or to take down an adversary. When you start abusing the law or using the law in order to thwart a political opponent, that's where things get really unbearable. And I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, whatever you are, you should be outraged by that. Certainly, we've never had a more separated country than we do today. The battle lines have been drawn, and never before has there been such a stark difference between political parties than ever before. And even with the coronavirus, you would think that it would bring us together, and it's really brought us apart. We're seeing congressional hearings where they're looking back already. We're still involved in the event.
Right.
And we should be having witnesses today to tell us what we should be doing today. Forget about 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago. There's plenty of time to write books and to figure out what went right or wrong. But we are still up to our eyeballs in mitigation and recovery and sickness and death. So politics has taken a very mean turn and a very cautionary turn. I think for all Americans, we need to get back to being Americans. We're all in the same boat, especially in a pandemic, especially right. The attacks on 9/11. On 9/11, we came together as one nation, and we understood where the enemy was. In this pandemic, we should be all for one and one for all. I just don't see the kind of unity that I would like to see in our country. And of course, we're just months away from a national election, which will be even weirder because it's not going to be a typical election. We're not going to have a typical convention. We're not going to have campaigning like we're used to, debates, and possibly even voting. Right.
It's kind of, it's surreal in a way. I mean, what's going on right now. And like, as you mentioned, the finger pointing is just at this point silly, but when you look back, like, was there a turning point where this it went from, like you said, it was rough and tumble. Politics was never, if you go back and read books about, anybody after George Washington, they were killing each other, probably some, maybe worse than some of this stuff. So it's never been this congenial, behind, but that was kind of like the behind the scenes more than right now it's in front of us. Was there I know when President Bush was elected, there was a lot, and but there was a lot of Democrats that were very angry about, that Republicans stole the election. Mm-hmm. And I know there were Republicans that were angry about what was going on in the recount and stuff. But was that the start of all this, do you think? Or is it just, you went through the primaries 4 years ago, and it was craziness on both sides of the aisle, so to speak.
Well, I was in the recount for 37 days. And I can tell you, it was the Wild West of politics. But we knew that George Bush had won fair and square. Every study post confirms that. But the closeness of the election, I think, really was the dividing point. Because if you're a Democrat, you think the election was stolen. If you're a Republican, you believe you won fair and square. And then it escalated, I think, to a point with social media in the advent of Twitter, where, you know, this is a 24/7 news cycle and social cycle. During Ronald Reagan's time, after 3 o'clock, if the news wasn't made, it wasn't being made except for a bulletin. Today, presidents are doing numerous events a day, news conferences, 24-hour news cycles. If you don't get it on the news, you'll get it in blogs or you get it in tweets. So, I mean, it's a whole different beast. There's no more controlling of quote unquote news. And what is news? It's whatever you deem it to be.
All right.
You know, there's very little time for investigation or confirmation or corroboration. Those days are over. It's better to apologize, apparently, than to get it right the first time. We saw that with Todd at NBC when he had to apologize today for not doing his due diligence. So I think that there's such a rush to judgment today. And, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And
Right.
we seem to have enough time for facts.
Yeah. It's kind of sad because everything's a headline. No one reads the stories. I mean, as much as the writers think they do, it's the headlines that get you. So what's after working in the White House, and I'm sure it's a high energy thing. Like you said you went to work at like 6 a.m. and you're going home late and then you come in early, whatever. What's life after that like for you?
Well, you know, you can do in the White House in one day what it takes the private sector to do in a month. So when you finally get back out into the private sector, they tell you to slow down.
Yeah.
Hey, wait, you know, slow down. You're in the White House. And I'm like, this is crazy. We need to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether you're working on the Hill or with the Hill, you know, you're on a whole different thing. You have to take it down a couple of cycles in order.
So this is like a vacation for you.
It is.
Yeah.
It is like a vacation because we got so much done in a day. And, you know, you were feeding from a fire hose, but you didn't feel the pressure because everybody was in the same boat. And we were all working together. I can tell you, it was the most cordial bunch of people to work with and for. Andy Card was a tremendous chief of staff. I never heard him raise his voice. I never heard him curse. The worst thing Andy Card could say to you was, "That's disappointing. You want to go back to your office," and oh my God.
Yeah.
But working at the White House, and I've worked for 3 presidents in various capacities, it's an amazing time. But service to a president is an opportunity, not a career. You have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And I was told when I first got to the White House, the average life of a senior staffer was 18 months. I stayed 3 years. And when I decided that my time was up, I went to the president. I said, you know what? It's time for me to go. He goes, what are you going for? I said, because it's the right time to leave. The best thing to do is control your own destiny, serve, leave the place better than you found it, and move on. And let somebody else have that experience. And if you were successful before the White House, you'll be successful after the White House. But there's a thing in Washington called Potomac fever, which can be more deadly than a virus. Because once you catch it, it's not treatable. And that's where you start believing in your own power.
Yeah.
And you don't want to leave. And you don't want to share. And you think it'll never end. And the best thing that you can do in Washington, the greatest success you can have, is when people return your phone calls when you're not at the White House. So treating people the same, whether you're in government or not, remembering why you're there, leave government better than you found it, understanding that the best ideas come from the least likely source. One of my interns at the White House, 18 years old, Alex Berger, saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars by coming up with a computer program that revolutionized the way my office ran, was betting.
Yeah.
Now Alex is a successful financial banker and entrepreneur, who 7 years ago hired me as a consultant. So, I mean, it's just weird how life is.
Yeah. And this time's been awesome. I could probably sit down with you for a lot longer than this. I really could, because your stories are great. I can't, as I said when you were here, when the book comes out, let me know.
Yeah, I'm writing a book. Yeah.
Are you really?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So when it comes out, definitely let me know. And I'd love to have you on in future times as well, because I think, you know, your stories are absolutely fantastic. And to bring out the props too. You had the props for the show.
I'm writing a book called The Other Side of the Fence, and that story's
that's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Brad, thanks for your time. I appreciate it dearly. I know you're a busy guy because you're still very active, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. As soon as it gets posted, I'll get you a copy of it. But I want to thank you again for coming on and being up here in Springfield when we dedicated that monument.
Yeah, it was awesome. Loved it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again, Bradley. Have a great day.
Take care.
Folks, thanks for watching The Upside. You have a great day. We'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye.